only thing left to be done is to capture the essential life data from your counterpart. Then you'll be complete, my Hyper Metal Sonic. When you awaken, kill him!
Metal Sonic. For ages, he was the one thing that stopped me countless times from getting to Metallic Madness Zone in Sonic CD. Fair enough, he frustrated me no end back then, but at the same time I couldn't overlook that he was just an awesome character in both design and generally how he acted. So, come the end of 2010 and First4Figures announces a Metal Sonic statue with breathtaking pictures of both exclusive and regular editions. In terms of availability, a regular edition is generally available from collectible stores as well as direct from First4Figures' website. This will cost you about £99 or $155, and it's limited to 1,500 pieces worldwide. The exclusive edition is, as the name suggests, exclusive to First4Figures.com and nowhere else. It costs a little bit more at around £115 or $175, or extortionately more if you're going by eBay. This one is a lot more limited at only 350 statues worldwide. I put my pre-order late on in mid-2011 for the exclusive edition, and thankfully I was able to snag one. After countless delays, shipping hiccups and more, Metal Sonic was finally released, and it arrived to me in early January 2012, over a year after the initial announcement. Oh well, never mind, better late than never. Either way, it's here. Before we get started, seeing First4Figures statues share certain characteristics, I won't be going into as much detail on some certain things. If you want to know more about these specific things, take a look at my Sonic the Hedgehog review video. If you see this R in the corner of the video, it means I've already covered something in more detail there. My first thoughts? Wow, this is a big box, and it's not even out of its external cardboard yet. The box artwork is fairly plain with only a few details and warnings, but it's functional for the job that it serves. Cutting along the main seal, opening up the flaps and removing the top cover, you can see that there's a new addition to the First4Figures packaging, and that is these foam inserts to protect the statue as well as the very colourful statue box when in transit. Anything that's there to keep my goods safe while getting to me is always a plus in my books. Pulling the outer box and the foam inserts away, we can finally get our first glimpse of the box artwork, revealing a very vibrant and almost neon colour scheme. Removing the plastic, we can see already that it shares many traits with the packaging of the other First4Figures classic Sonic products, such as the checkerboard design, the Sonic the Hedgehog logo on the top, as well as the various promotional images which were used during the initial reveal of the statue, which looks stunning on this version by the way. Following this trend is the statue information on the back of the box. The words about the character are lifted straight from the product information page on First4Figures website, so not really too much to say here other than it's a nice bit of background to the inspiration behind the character and the statue. Also noted is the product number and the artist, who in this case is a big name at First4Figures, Goran Sadojevic. The colour used on the box looks suitably bright and futuristic, crossing blues, purples and whites, and it makes the package a joy to look at. More of a nitpick than anything, but whilst the box is a lovely package to look at, I'm not too convinced that it fits Metal Sonic's character that well. When I think Metal Sonic, I think of a more dark, evil and foreboding image. After all, this is meant to be an evil and cold-hearted killing machine. Like I said though, this is nitpicking at its absolute worst, and ultimately, this isn't what you're going to be displaying in your home, and even then, this colour scheme is really growing on me. In terms of what you will be displaying in your home, let's pop the tabs and open up the box to see what's inside, and ultimately to see what you paid for. The good looks don't stop when we open up the top. Take a look at the care that's been taken to fit the license on the flaps here. After much fiddling, pull out the massive polystyrene enclosure to see more of the detail that we've come to expect. Metal Sonic and the Sonic the Hedgehog logo is moulded into a foam, and over on the other side, Metal Sonic has been moulded into the foam too. First4Figures didn't need to include any of these kinds of details, but they did, and it makes the package seem a whole lot more worth it. Like virtually all other statues in First4Figures catalogue, there's an authenticity card taped to the front of the enclosure. Taking the card away and having a closer look, you can see that instead of using game artwork, they used a photograph of the statue instead, and they picked a great one. I'll happily be displaying this next to my statue once it's all out of the box. Speaking of getting it out of the box, it's time to take a Stanley blade to the seal and finally get inside to what we've been waiting to see. Lifting the top half away, we can see that the statue has several parts making it up. It looks like we're in for a small build. One thing I will say is that all these parts look to be very well wrapped and protected. So, immediately visible, we can see the base on the left, most of the statue in the centre, one of Metal's feet, and finally, only for the exclusive versions, we have a compartment for batteries, which First4Figures have very kindly included to get us started. So, now it's time to set it up. Firstly, I recommend taking the base out first and unwrapping it and putting the batteries in. Looking at the bottom, we can see the base text as well as the unique number. This time around, I got statue number 228. Doesn't exactly roll off the tongue as well as my regular Sonic's 1295, but still, a number's a number and I don't really mind. To put the batteries in, take off the cover and then put the 3 AA batteries in. Replace the cover and we can continue the build. Next up, it's time to very carefully remove the main statue body itself. As I said before, this statue's limbs aren't exactly made of reinforced titanium alloy, so take good care when removing all the various foam inserts and removing from the packaging. The next step is to unwrap the statue and prepare it for fixing to the base. Once it's unwrapped, you can see that there's a connecting rod protruding from the bottom of the spark in order to give the electronic parts of the statue their power. Very carefully seat the statue into the indented hole and plug in the top of the base. And finally, to complete the statue, you need to remove Metal Sonic's right foot from the packaging and carefully push it into the exposed rod in his right ankle. Once the foot is on, the statue is complete and it's ready to display. But before the statue finds a permanent home, let's take a closer look. I think the first thing we have to cover is where do I start? There are almost too many different aspects to cover, so I'll start with the basics. The statue is about 14.5 inches tall and it's quite surprisingly very light for its size, weighing only 3.42 kilos. By comparison, First4Figures Sonic the Hedgehog, while smaller, weighs more than this. I honestly don't know what kind of conclusion I should draw from this, but moving on. They have captured Metal Sonic in what I personally think is the best pose they could have. It isn't based off of any official artwork, but it's very much a captured in action style of stance. I can easily imagine Metal Sonic jetting along at full speed in pursuit of something, and whatever that something is, it seems to be set firmly in his sights as he reaches out to grab and destroy. This statue is practically begging to be inspected close up, so let's start from the top. As the intro of this film probably showed you, no feature defines Metal Sonic quite more than his half-circle red eyes. So in this case, it's excellent that the eyes are right on this statue, given that they're so iconic to the character. Physically, the eyes have a very glossy and almost glass-like shiny surface to them, which in this case is a perfect design choice given that the real robot would likely be the same. To actually look at, these eyes are pleasing to view from almost any angle. To get a better idea, Metal Sonic looks to mean business, with his eyes giving off a very steely glare. There is one thing I should tell you though. Looking at this statue from any angle is one thing, but if you were to view this head on, the effect goes from being evil to being simply chilling as he stares you down. Equally good looking is the overall sculpt of Metal Sonic's head. Whilst it's a bit hard to go wrong here with such a simple design, it's well shaped and painted, especially his 2 ears. Not only that, but all the little details are here, and well represented they are too, such as the screws on Metal's cheeks and his long pointed nose. Again, the paintwork here is excellent, with all the relevant colours being lined to First4Figures' excellent standard. The shade of blue, however, didn't initially have me sold. When I took this out of the box, there was no way that it matched the more rich and deep blue shading or seemed anywhere near as shiny as all the promotional pictures. It didn't seem to match any of the official character artwork I'd seen either. I remained unconvinced until I played Sonic CD again. Whether or not this was a conscious decision or not, the statue's shade of blue most closely matches the colour of the original Metal Sonic sprite, which I suppose is fine, but it did throw me off having become so used to the darker blue I'm used to seeing. I said earlier on that the statue looks to be taken from an in-action freeze frame. That you can largely thank to the arms and hands, and at the ends of these hands are what I believe to be what shows off the sculpt work at its best, Metal Sonic's fingers. They are all individual as well as being individually posed. Apart from having detail along every finger and being threateningly needle-like, they are posed excellently on both hands, fanned out on his right and reaching out to grab on his left. Apart from the brilliant pose, I feel this is where the sculpt on the statue shines the strongest, what with every finger being individually detailed and attached. The arms themselves are simple, but the blue forearm joints are well represented with the appropriate shape and joint covers. Of course, in the centre of all this is the powerhouse of Metal Sonic's speed, his jet engine body. There wasn't much to this area on the original character, but that hasn't stopped First4Figures from applying neat little details here and there, such as these cooling vents on the back. The intake and exhaust themselves are well painted, however there's a small exception on the exhaust. The painting in the deeper nooks and crannies looks a little rough, but it's not much of a problem unless you're really looking up close. Finally, moving down to the lower parts of the statue, most of it is dominated by this enormous translucent yellow spark and Metal Sonic's legs and feet. At this point, I realised that the only thing supporting the entire upper part of the statue was this one thin leg. All of a sudden, the light weight of this statue makes a whole lot more sense. Anyway, much like the arms, the legs look excellent and the joints, whilst naturally being entirely static, are very convincing. The feet are wonderfully done too. The lining work on both the shoes is just right and the choice of colour is also brilliant. The only thing I can fault here is the bottom of his raised foot. The underside, whilst indented and in two segments, is completely plain and flat, something which surprised me. Another nice little touch is that the left foot is only just hovering above the surface of the base itself. It's a nice little detail which adds to the in-action appearance this piece has. The most prevalent aspect on the lower part of the statue is of course this spark. On the regular edition, this spark would be completely opaque polystone, unlike the translucent plastic seen here on the exclusive edition. As sad as it may sound, I love the way that the spark has been crafted. The sparks appear to be exploding from the bottom Metal Sonic's foot in all directions, and the gradual coloration along the length of these sparks looks fantastic. With all this brilliant representation on the statue, I'm disappointed to say that I think that the base is very plain. The design they've chosen for this base is fashioned from Stardust Speedway's Bad Future, but to be perfectly honest, the resemblance is fairly minimal in terms of general looks and detailing, especially when compared to other statues in the line. For example, compare these level tiles to the statue base. Apart from the colour scheme and a select few features such as the purple bottom and these squares, it doesn't tell me that it's Stardust Speedway. I suppose the main issue here is the lack of detailing. Look at all of these features that were in the original Stardust Speedway which didn't make it into the statue base. I can understand them omitting the broken horns, but what about the other features such as these pipes, bars and other details? They really would have taken the base to another level. My final gripe with this base is the top. Apart from the spark, the top has absolutely nothing else decorating it. Maybe adding some painted scorch marks would have helped to spice the top up a bit. The colour scheme chosen certainly fits the statue, but there really isn't enough detail for me otherwise. From the looks of things, the statue has some issues in places with painting and design choices, but there may be one saving grace yet. Being the exclusive edition, one of the main selling features, apart from being a more rare and limited piece, is the inclusion of LEDs placed in Metal Sonic's eyes, the front and back of his engine, as well as the large spark erupting from the back of Metal's foot. Looking at these parts though, you'd be forgiven for thinking that apart from the spark, none of this would light up. However, due to some witchcraft unknown to me, Metal Sonic's eyes, and both of his engine intake and exhaust, are able to light up perfectly, whilst remaining seemingly completely opaque when switched off. That of course brings us to this small push switch on the base, the switch to activate the exclusive features. Now, press in the switch and the statue flashes into life. All of a sudden, the entire dynamic of this statue has changed. Metal Sonic's eyes are clearly visible even in this bright light owing to the bright class of LED which has been used. His spark is partially visible as it strobes before going into a constantly on phase. The sparks will continually alternate between these two modes. Whilst you can't really see it here, the intake and exhaust on Metal Sonic's engine have a very small amount of glow. On the intake, the glow is extremely slight. It's only a little more intense in the centre than at the edges, whilst on the exhaust, there is a slightly brighter ring of light surrounding the nozzle. Most visible in this light is Metal Sonic's eyes. These look awesome. Even in broad daylight they are clearly visible. Just as a note, in this film it looks as if one eye is lit up more than the other. I can assure you though that in person this effect isn't noticeable, at least on my statue. The main thing I'm glad about here is that the eyes are given the most prevalence. After all, they are one of Metal Sonic's most defining features. It's fair to say then that in this case, whilst the eyes are a big selling part of the character, most of the other features in this light seem to be a bit underwhelming as they are harder to see under these conditions. That's why for true wow factor, I recommend waiting until darkness falls. Now that is more like it. When I said that the lights added a new dimension, this is what I was talking about. Now we can see all of these features properly, the statue takes on an entirely new look. The spark is now completely illuminated, and it looks simply stellar as the light continues along the whole length of the spark as it flickers, at the same time casting light onto the sole of Metal's other foot as well as across the top of the base. The engine intake, whilst originally not that visible in the light, is clearly but at the same time subtly highlighted in the dark, and around the back the exhaust is clearly propelling Metal Sonic into his overdrive state. But once again, the star of the show here has to be Metal Sonic's eyes. They look great in the daylight, but in the dark they truly define what makes Metal Sonic Metal Sonic. It seems that these eyes were bright for a reason. They cast enough light to cast a red glow out and highlight various features of the statue. They highlight Metal's muzzle line, his nose, as well as his outstretched arm and hand with his sharp and needle-like fingers. I'll tell you this though, while the statue may be an excellent display piece alone in the day, at night it can turn into something truly different. The way that the light highlights only certain parts gives the statue an extremely sinister appearance. Combine all of these elements together and you have a sight which is simply candy for the eyes. The flashing spark as well as the bright red eyes highlight most of the iconic features, and it adds a real sense of life to what would otherwise be an entirely static display piece. Which it still is, but you know what I mean. The only aspect I'm currently not too sure on is for battery life. I know that there are 3 AA batteries and they can only take something electronic so far, so just to be sure, I'll be powering the statue down for the night. Release the switch on the back and the lights remain on momentarily before fading away slowly into darkness. Almost characteristically, the eyes seem to be the last thing to fade away completely. I have no idea whether this was intentional or not, but First4Figures can certainly colour me impressed. After all of that and all of those pros and all of those cons, what are my final thoughts? First4Figures have created what I believe to be one of the best pieces in the classic Sonic line so far. The pose that Metal Sonic has been shown in is more than suitable, and it also shows off Goran Sadojevic's sculpting talent to its finest, especially with all the numerous small details dotted all over the piece. The only unfortunate thing for me is that the base is such a letdown. With so much missed opportunity for extra detail, it's almost sad that when First4Figures makes all the effort, the base almost seems like an afterthought compared to everything else. Putting that aside though, what does make up for this is virtually everything else. The box art, the colour scheme, the sculpt, and most of all the lights. There's no doubt about it in my mind, without these a lot would be lost. Metal Sonic is, above all else, a robot, and the inclusion of these lights is what truly makes it that, and it also defines the statue's character. If you're able to get one of these without breaking the bank, by all means take the plunge. It will stand out in any Sonic fan's collection and it looks incredible as a piece in itself. Just don't count on sleeping at night. He will be watching you.